mentioned the trickster and the satirist. That's their archetype. They are a trickster, often tricking people into thinking that they're partaking of serious opinion when really it's satirical. Mark Twain did that. He's a big believer in that. The satirist as trickster. And when we communicate to audiences the foibles of other human beings, we use archetypes that they love and have seen come back again and again and again.
As a satirist, you are a contrarian, and it seems that you are consciously a contrarian. This makes you different. It makes you an other. Sometimes that must feel uncomfortable, but you also have a sense of mission. To be a contrarian, it seems that you have to be aware of difference, of otherness, and be aware of what in you is contrary and different. That sense of difference and otherness is part of thinking independently. If you don't have this consciousness of difference and otherness, you conform and you blend in perfectly, and you may not even be aware that you blend in. The sense of not fitting in is a way to control and discipline independence. If that's a fair summary, what is the consciousness of a contrarian? How do you experience that consciousness in you?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't really think about it like that because to me, contrarian implies almost, and I'm not sure if this is your implication, two things: the one thing and then the thing that's contrary to that. But the way I think of it is the way things are and the rules and behaviors and conventions that we've all decided to embrace and accept as normal are, like I said, an infinitesimal, tiny fraction of the possible. And so to be a contrarian, as you say, I feel like I'm existing in the 99.99999% of, at least I have my foot in that other realm of the possible. Well, of course, having one foot firmly planted in convention. So I don't think of it as contrarian. I think of the people who I am contrasting my ideas with as very limited in their thinking.
Hmm. So, what do you feel is the benefit for you of being in this small group?
Well, I think the group is expanding, first of all. I think a lot of people feel that way. And, in recent history, the first kind of vibe that we got from this was the hippies, the baby boomers coming of age in the 60s, feeling like, hey, we don't like how things are. We don't like the way the world is run, and we want to do it differently. And I was just talking to somebody the other day about the hippies and how I'm a total hippie. Like every attitude that the hippies had, I'm right there with them. Like I agree with them on every single point. I just decided not to wear the tie-dyed clothes and smoke pot and sit around listening to tambourine and lute music all day, I guess. But the philosophy is something that I embrace. And one of the best things about being a person who kind of thinks of themselves as at least wanting to not be constrained by convention is that I'm an extremely accepting person. I accept, and not only accept, it's not like tolerance, it's a celebration of difference. So, that phrase celebrate difference, like I'm all over that. That's my credo. And so at the Onion, I was always hiring people who were neurodivergent or too much trouble to be hired somewhere else, that kind of, I would I would celebrate the kind of behavior that would get people fired at a normal job because I saw the value in that person inherently. And I think that comes from that embrace of, nonconformity. So I think it's a great quality. It's one of my better qualities. I really do see the best in people to a fault.
That's a very positive attitude to celebrate difference.
I think so.
Um, yeah. Um, Very, very positive to celebrate difference. And although you backed away from the word, that seems to me like a basis of tolerance, that you can celebrate difference, that you're not always trying to get people to fit in. You're not always trying to get people to conform. Um, and as you know, there's lots of historical examples of trying to get people conformed. For example, how prisons are used in society. You know, um, how prisons may have an element of um, imprisoning the nonconformists. And I'm not just mean in a political sense, but people who are odd,
Hmm.
people who are different. And so that sounds to me really a really interesting way of putting it. That um, when you celebrate difference, like the satirical aspect, we have the corrosive aspect of satire, but I've been asking questions about the consciousness of difference that's part of that, the consciousness of others, and you've taken that and turned it around and looked at it as a celebration of difference. What I would say was very um, is an element of tolerance. And then I'm kind of wondering, is there that actually in satire?
Yeah, you use the word corrosive, and I wouldn't use that word at all. Maybe it corrodes things that need to be corroded, but corrosive implies that it's damaging, to society in some way. I think it only helps society and it moves us forward. And yeah, I don't like the word tolerance because it feels like, well, I'm tolerating that person. Like, and I do a lot more than tolerate, you know. Like I prefer that type of person. And then you mentioned prison. Like obviously, there's a whole other dimension of this conversation we could go into about you know people who don't uh, ascribe to moral behavior because it's conventional, and so they're in the 99.999% that I talked about, and they're like, well, I shouldn't abide by any rules of morality, and I'm not one of those people. I'm very very solidly in the camp of there's a moral code that humans have developed over our millions of years of evolution that I believe in, and we all kind of know it inherently, and we've tried to write religions and rules and stuff around it to codify it. But I don't want to be so different that I'm like hurting other people or harming the world, or I want to do the opposite.
Mm. What other aspects of difference in society do you see that maybe isn't accepted, but you think should be accepted?
Oh my God, where to even start? Um, there's there's a thousand. Like what? what?
But can you think of one thing that maybe most people wouldn't think of as um, a difference that should be celebrated?
Well, I mean, right now we have a pretty repressive right wing government in charge, and they're prudes. And so I think anything having to do with, you know, sexual fetishes or, you know, uh, nonconformist gender identity, sexual identity, all that whole realm of sexuality. Like we were ruled now by people who really come from the 1950s. They believe in strict man-woman marriage, and anything outside of that is considered immoral to them. So that would be one right there.
In your writings, such as your book, The Elements of Humor, and an article you wrote for Reader's Digest magazine, you describe a larger aspect of satire and humor that I'd call archetypal. Now, by satire, I think I mean the same thing as you. I mean a consciousness that uses ridicule and mockery to expose thinking and behavior that need to be corrected for the good of society. By archetypal, I mean what's deeply embedded in the human psyche going back thousands of years. Despite the evolution of our thinking over thousands of years, here in the 21st century, we still have satire as a form of consciousness. Satire is found alive and well in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Before that, satire is found in mythology and indigenous mythology. This mythology has figures who are disruptors, tricksters, satirists. They ridicule behavior or exhibit in their own behavior what is a lesson of what should be ridiculed. The ridicule disrupts the behavior and makes the disruption memorable to pass along the lesson. But these figures can also seem uncontrollable and deranged and out of sync with others. In your book, The Elements of Humor, you describe this part of the psyche as universal, found in early human beings. You call it, in your words, a mysterious force, a mischievous spirit, a devilish spirit, and a trickster. You invoke a new mythic figure of Prometheus, who brings satire and comedy to human beings rather than stealing fire from the gods, for which he was punished, as a satirist might also be punished. So, what does it mean to you that the consciousness of satire is archetypal or instinctual?
Well, I think of those two things as different. I do think it's instinctual. For whatever reason, we evolved with this ability, this need to have some portion of our society. Their job is to look back on society and make fun of it, comment on it, to the delight of everyone else. We've always had that. The archetypal aspect, to me, that's really just like the shorthand, the language of satire, especially when dealing with characters. We deal in character archetypes. So there are certain types of characters. You mentioned the trickster and the satirist. That's their archetype. They are a trickster, often tricking people into thinking that they're partaking of serious opinion when really it's satirical. Mark Twain did that. He's a big believer in that. The satirist as trickster. And when we communicate to audiences the foibles of other human beings, we use archetypes that they love and have seen come back again and again and again, since the ancient Greeks. There are certain characters that we like that are archetypal. And I've never really thought about the two as related, or because the instinct is older, much deeper, and probably broader, but the archetypes are a more modern, like, the last 100, 200,000 years or something, language, like symbols that we put on top of what we're trying to communicate.
Okay. If you've talked about um, your satirical consciousness, um, this celebration of difference, this state of mind you have as being a small portion of society, and you're aware that there's a larger portion of society that doesn't see things that way. So just looking at this small group that you're a member of, um, so if a lost tribe of pure satirists who think like you was ever discovered, a tribe where everyone is a satirist and non-satirists are unknown. That's not part of the experience of this tribe. What do you think life would be like in that tribe?
Well, it's a very good question, and I can't help but think of the many, many tribes of Native Americans who, for whom humor was such a huge and integral part of their culture and the way they communicate, and still is. When when they were protesting the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, they had a lot of college kids show up to protest with them, and they tricked them and pretended that they were inducting them into the tribe with this ceremony that they made up, and they're laughing about it after the fact. And this is what they do: they razz each other, and it's too bad that we kind of obliterated the most of those people, and they're living on reservations and they haven't integrated into the culture. But the, some of the finest comedy comes out of oppressed peoples. You look at the percentage of Jews, Irish people, and Black people in comedy, and it far exceeds their percentage of the general population. And American Indians are arguably more oppressed than any of those groups, and they're not even in, no late night TV show has a Native American comedy writer on staff, as far as I know. And so, to answer your question, I feel like we kind of know the answer to that. Like, I'm much more familiar with Jewish culture and hang out with a lot of Jews. And comedy is just such an integral part of the way they communicate. And, the reason oppressed peoples are so inclined to comedy is because it's a coping mechanism. It's how they, as a culture, deal with some of the horrible blows they've been dealt in their history. So you go through a few generations of that, and it just becomes part of the language. The language of Yiddish is so funny. Just the words are funny, and so many other aspects to Irish, Black, Jewish, Indian culture are just inherently funny. The way they communicate, the way they talk, and again, I think that's delightful. It's a difference that I celebrate and love, and wish we had more of. I come from kind of the opposite. I come from a kind of in Northern European culture. My people don't really have a sense of humor. We believe meaning in life comes through suffering and hard work. And I don't know how I ended up with the humor bug, but definitely an odd duck.